All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the AZAPO Limpopo online series of political education. Today we are going to be looking at the abolition of provinces and what the Black Consciousness movement recommends in terms of what we do for our country. This is not a new topic of discussion. It is something that the Black Consciousness movement has spoken about and carried for the last 50 years. I am today hosting Cde Don Nkadimeng, who requires no introduction to the Black Consciousness family and liberation movement. As he is a stalwart of the Black Consciousness movement, born at Middelburg in 1948, he did his matric education at Botshabelo Training Institute, obtaining a B Juris and LLB degrees at the University of Limpopo. He got admitted as an attorney in 1977 and married and settled at Teflo. He is a leader of note in the Black Consciousness movement, having led the organization at different levels, from being a branch chairperson in Mankweng, provincial chairperson at Limpopo, Deputy Secretary General at the national level, Secretary for Manpower Utilization, Publicity Director, and Secretary General. There are so many things that he has done for the liberation struggle. His contribution over a lifetime of his contribution. He's been a founder member and past chairperson of the Black Lawyers Association. He is he has done a lot for the liberation movement. He is a founder member and past president of the Convocation of the University of Limpopo, founder member of the Worldwide Zionist Front based in Libya. He's also a senior lecturer at the University of Limpopo School, an attorney and a member of the South African Law Commission special project on security legislation, and also a legal advisor to the Lutheran Church. Over the lifetime of his contribution to our struggle, he has AZAPO, he has defended AZANLA, ANC, MK, PAC, and APLA cadres in the apartheid courts, as well as thousands of university and high school learners in the wake of the 1976 uprisings. And during the period of the transition from the apartheid era to the democracy that we now have, he is the one who wrote the letter that withdrew AZAPO's participation from the CODESA negotiations. He is well-traveled, having traveled to a number of countries, promoting the Black consciousness and trying to reconcile the liberation movement ahead of those CODESA negotiations that were held at Kempton Park, having been to Libya, to Botswana, to Lesotho, to Zambia, Zimbabwe, USA, Britain, Germany, Holland, Switzerland, and Norway, as well as Belgium. So many countries that he has been visiting, fundraising for the Black consciousness movement, as well as talking to other liberation movements. Welcome, Cde Don. And
thank you.
I wish to spend the next hour and a bit to you and really in conversation about the struggle of our land and the things that we have seen happening. Just by way of introduction, I just want to play this song as we welcome you to this conversation. Take a listen.
I shall fight for AZANLA. Beloved country, I shall fight for AZANLA. I shall fight socialist Tanzania. If you can but carelessly, I'll meet you on the freedom day. Strong tireless is blessing for socialist Tanzania. If you can but carelessly, I'll meet you on the freedom day. I shall fight for AZANLA. AZANLA. I shall fight for AZANLA. AZANLA.
All right, my name is Simpiwe Ashe. I am hosting Don, as we affectionately call him. And today we're going to be engaging in conversation about the structure of our country. And we have about 9 provincial governments, as well as a national government. And AZAPO, over its 50 years of existence as a revolutionary movement, has actively engaged in struggle against the rejection of the balkanization of our country. And we have seen this division of our country taking different forms at different times. You would recall that the colonial powers came and descended upon our country to the peace of our country over time. They came from various European countries like Portugal, Britain, Netherlands, Germany, and France, and all over Europe, trying to plunder the mineral resources of our country and ultimately colonizing it, and in the process, balkanizing it and partitioning it into colonies. We had the Cape, the Natal, the Free State, Orange Free State, and the Transvaal. And then in the march of time, as we transitioned into this democracy, we still have our country balkanized into 9 provincial governments. So I'd like to tease Don a little bit about the genesis of this balkanization of our country. Where does it emanate from? And just to check whether the liberation movement, as we knew it, was not agreed on the need to destroy the balkanization of the country and establish a unitary AZANLA, so to speak. Don, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to start, but let me start with a disclaimer. Excuse me, I'm not occupying any official position in AZAPO, so my views will not be the views of the organization.
Yes.
I don't want to take it.
Look, I'm talking to the stalwart of the Black consciousness movement who has been there, seen that, and actually developed some of the policy positions in the movement. So quite conversant with many policy positions of this in its entirety. So I just want your perspective today about the journey that we have traveled thus far and up to the position that we have taken. And it's important that people get to understand the genesis that brought us to where we are today. So your views are your views.
Well, maybe let's understand the history. When the ANC and PAC were banned in 1960, the white regime then started promoting Bantustan leaders. And AZAPO was the only political organization in the country, a genuine liberation movement in the country at the time. And we fought the Bantustan. Then I think mid-70s, let's move to mid-80s. Mid-80s, the regime realized that it was now unable to rule the country because of the black resistance. at the time, and started negotiations with the exiled ANC. And some of the black liberation organizations only joined the negotiations later when they were formalized. Now, I want to talk about the Bantustans and the provinces because everybody is aware that there is a similarity between the former Bantustans and the provinces, and people must understand how it came about that we have almost as many provinces as there were Bantustans at the time. It started with the negotiations that were held at Kempton Park. Before the actual talks started, there were what were referred to as talks about talks. In other words, the liberation movement, we came together with PAC and ANC and formed the Patriotic Front. The initial intention was that we are going to have talks between the white regime and the liberation organization.
Yes.
But then, as the momentum developed, the intention was, in the end, to hold a round-table discussion where the Bantustan leaders, the regime, and the liberation movement would be equal partners in the negotiations. And that is when the AZAPO started picking up problems with our patriotic partners, because we thought the Bantustans and their leaders had a choice to join either the regime or to join the liberation organization. But we couldn't just envisage a stage where the liberation movement would have an equal vote with Bantustan leaders.
Yeah.
And to us, this was a principal position. This then led to them to AZAPO being kicked out of the Patriotic Front just before the negotiations. And then we then realized that we had no role to play in the CODESA negotiations because they were not likely to produce anything that black people would be proud of. You can imagine the setup at the time was that the regime hosted the talks within the country. We wanted the talks to be held outside the country and presided over by a neutral chairperson. But the overwhelming opinion was that the talks must be held inside the country.
Yes.
And when we looked at the composition of the participants, the regime paid for the venues, for transport, for accommodation, for food. They even paid stipends to participants. And we realized the position of the liberation movement was so compromised that we didn't expect any good results from Kempton Park. The other thing was, of course, that the liberation armies were demobilized and disarmed. There was no way, if the talks broke out at the time, there was no way the struggle would be revived as it was at the time, because it would be difficult for the liberation movement to go outside again, resume the armed struggle. It was not going to be possible. So we realized the compromises that the liberation movement was called upon to make were just too great. And the last straw was that the issue of land, the reposition of land, and the redistribution of the economy were not on the agenda of the discussions of the liberation. That's why even now, it's only now after 26 years that we hear talks about amending Section 25 of the Constitution that talks about the right to land. Because those issues were not on the agenda of Congress. And that's the reason why AZAPO thought I think we would withdraw from the negotiations, because it looks like the white regime was looking for black leaders in order to front them politically. It was not a genuine attempt to transfer power to black people. And when you look at the results of the Kempton Park, I mean, look at the consequences. These consequences we are living through today are the direct result of the negotiations that were held at Kempton Park. I mean, the outcome was that blacks were given the government, the political power. The political power, and the whites retained economic power, they retained the land. And we were then expected to run a country with about 50 or so million people, a developing country, with taxes only. In other words, I think today the taxman collects about $1 trillion per annum. I mean, how do you develop a country of 60 million people? It's only $1 trillion rand for that. You can't do that. So it was quite clear that the plan at the beginning, and even now, is that you will. I usually give this analogy of, if you have 3 dogs and you want them to fight over a bone, you don't give them three bones. You give them 1 bone. They will fight and even forget about the bone. Now, what happens here is, whites are sitting on trillions of rand. I mean, in this country, there is a lot of money in private hands, white hands, that's not being invested in the economy of the country, because they don't like the debate around the redistribution of land. Their excuse is there is political uncertainty about the property rights, and therefore they are not ready to invest their trillions. And as a result, the economy is going down. I mean, if you look at the last 26 years, I mean, unemployment has reached in fact, I think we are the highest in the world by unemployment in this country. We are number 1 in terms of inequalities. We are the most unequal society in the world.
In the world.
In the world, yes. And our lives have regressed so much that, I mean, even violence, for example, just femicide, we are number 1 in the world. Corruption, I don't know where we are, but I think we are right at the top in terms of corruption. Now, all these values have been eroded because of the CODESA Kempton Park negotiations. We compromised just too much. I mean, we are still crammed in 13% of the land, and we consist of what? More than 80% of the population. Look at our homeless people, 7,000 people, black people living in shacks today. I always, when I want to be generous to the ANC, I'm saying their leaders have realized that they simply can't develop the country with the little that they have from tech. And in frustration, they just help themselves to what is there. You know? I'm not trying to justify it. That is very, very bad. I mean, but the government cannot resolve the crisis that the country is facing. I mean, if you can't give people land, you are not going to resolve their economic situations. I mean, some of us wanted to build malls. Where am I going to build a mall if I don't have land? Right? So all malls are owned by white people. Farms, all banks, agricultural land, you name it, it's in white hands. You know? And you are told we have attained democracy. They will never talk about freedom, because what we have is actually not freedom at all. I mean,
yeah,
it's not freedom at all. I think the other thing, which I think is the bone of what I'm trying to say today, is why do you have 9 provinces in a country like ours? I've always asked people in the street, why do we need Masuku in Johannesburg as a NSNMC for health when Kze can do everything?
yeah.
Every department, national department, is multiplied
replicated
9 times. And as a result, we are one of the most overgoverned nations on earth. You have 400 MPs. What do you have? 200 members of the National Council of Provinces. You have thousands of MPLs. We have thousands of councillors. You add on traditional leaders, then politicians constitute almost half the population. And that's why today politics and politicians dominate our lives. If you are not a politician, nobody listens to you. Yeah. Now,
no, I hear you, and I really want to understand this thing. We went into those coalition negotiations in the early 90s, and we got what we call a democratic state, or democracy.
Democracy.
And we have what they call political power. Do you really think that this country has attained political power? Because when you have political power, it enables you to effect the developmental changes that you need to effect in the country for progression and forward movement, and so that people can see the real change. And I think, in as much as, other components of the liberation movement would tell you that we have, democracy, we have really freed the country, I think no component of the liberation movement can claim to have really advanced the country in terms of the objectives of the liberation project. And here we are with a balkanized country, and all we did was to expand the Bantu stance, because if you check the form and the nature of the provincial governments that we have, and the general governance is no different to what the liberation movement was fighting against during the of serious liberation struggle. Can we really claim to have a country led by people who have political power?
Yeah, no, it's not possible. I mean, political power must be buttressed by economic power. I mean, you can't have political programs which are not supported by the economy. I mean, it remains a dream. I mean, the ANC has been dreaming the last 26 years to improve the lives of people. They can't do it because they don't own the economy. I mean, look at the social grants today. I mean, can you really be proud of a nation of 50, 60 million, 15 million of whom are on welfare? I mean, what type of state is that? They can't create jobs because they don't have the land, they don't have the economy, they don't own the economy. And all they are living off, our politicians, are salaries from those who own the economy, the taxes of those who own the economy. There's just no way you can have any meaningful political program if you can't have economic muscle to support it. There will always be promises and promises and promises until such time that economic power is spent.
In about 3 years ago, 2017, the African National Congress, started to have a conversation within itself about the reconfiguration of these provincial governments. And I think as we march towards the 2019 election, that reconfiguration discussion got more heated, and there were some proposals that, maybe the ANC is now beginning to listen to the view that has been propounded by the Black Consciousness Movement over time, that we need to, do something about these provincial governments. And the proposal is that of reconfiguring them to, from 9 to 6 or some other model that they are looking at. Do you really think that is something that we should be looking forward to?
Well, I think, look, my understanding, even at the time, just before 1994, was that certain of the agreements that were reached at Kempton Park would apply only in the first 5 years. And after that, there would be major changes. For example, we have always proposed that you can retain the 9 provinces, it doesn't matter, as long as they are not political entities. I mean, you can't have 9 premiers and 9 legislatures. They are just the same as, by instance, we call them tin pot leaders, disposed, because they actually don't have political power. Can anyone really tell me in the last 26 years what legislation of any significance was passed by a provincial legislature that you still remember? You can't remember. Now, what legislation? I looked this morning at Schedule 4 and Schedule 5 of the Constitution that gives the provincial legislatures power to make laws. I mean, they make laws on very silly things like dog tax, license. I mean, you don't need them. So, and when you look at the cost, I mean, an MEC is a politician entitled to bodyguards, housing, insurance, traveling. When you just calculate the cost of one MEC, who actually has a national counterpart, the provinces, there is no law, a provincial law that can be nullified by this national government. In other words, there is no area, legislative area, where provincial legislatures have absolute power or final power. They can be overruled at any time. And why do we keep them as political entities? We can remove all the politicians and also remove the National Council of Provinces. We can save billions and billions of money. The provincial seats right now can be used as service centers, for example. We have administrators that carry out programs of the national government. We have the municipalities. I mean, why do you need 3 tiers of parliament if 2 can make it? I mean, the national government and the municipalities can effectively serve the population. Now, I believe, and this is personally, it's not AZAPO, I believe the provinces were created in order to provide employment to cadres of the liberation movement when they came back unskilled, right? And I think I will be.
And so they have accumulated enough pension fund to.
Now, I really can't be, for the sake of me, and I've told all premiers in this country, they've been personal friends of mine. I just asked them what role they played in my life as politicians. They couldn't define themselves because there's absolutely nothing. You know, when Jesus speaks on COVID, he's the last word. I mean, MACs can tell us when to go and do tests and stuff like that, but you need a politician to do that. I mean, they can send us doctors to come and test us. Why should I have a minister of economic development if I have a national minister who does everything? Now, I don't know, and I think the bad thing about politics also is perpetuating the tribal element in our societies. I think there was a time when I argued that if you outlaw racism, you must also outlaw tribalism, because we have been fighting both of these things. Why? Look, it's no brainer. If you are in Limpopo here, the premier will come either from the Sutus or from the vendors or from the Shangans. In KwaZulu-Natal, it will be Zikalala, Zulu, Eastern Cape, it will be closer. You've got to be a Musutu to be a premier in the Free State, and a Botswana to be a premier in Northwest. I mean, what type of country are we building here when we actually tried to fight racism and tribalism? Zuma is at times called 100% Zulu boy. I mean, what type of nonsense?
And yet we call ourselves a developmental state, and you wonder, okay, to what end are we developing this state? If we continue to balkanize a country, along tribal lines. And I think, our struggle has regressed, and the country has regressed so much. And the question that people are asking is, okay, this is where now, 26 years beyond 1994, what should we be doing differently? We have heard, for instance, the government and some within the state apparatus talking about the reinforcement of district municipalities as some kind of models of governance. Shouldn't that be the real focus of governance in the country? Because, I mean, that is where, governance should be, closer to the people and delivering those services that are required by the people. And how do you then begin to justify the continuance of, provincial governance and all of that?
How do you do that? I mean, look, it's still going to get more complicated with the Constitutional Court. Recent judgment that you can become a politician and a member
right as an individual
without belonging to a party. It's going to be more complex. Now, you can imagine then the ANC is already talking about holding one election for all these three tiers of government. I can't imagine the confusion that's going to happen at that time. I hope the provinces will be gone, and because really, I for the sake of me, I still am awaiting a convincing argument why provinces should continue to exist when they reign the fiscal so much. There was a time, I think 20 years ago, when I drew up the costs of provinces to the national fiscus. It was unbelievable. And in return, there was nothing that people of this country are getting from provinces. In fact, they are just another source of corruption, just another side of corruption. I really can't see how anybody can stand up on a political platform and justify the existence of provinces and the money that is poured into. None of these provinces are self-sufficient. They all get money from the central government. Maybe Gauteng, I don't know how much, maybe Gauteng can sustain itself, but all other provinces are waiting for the Minister of Finance every year to allocate funds for them. And then how much of that goes to politicians? I mean, more than half of it goes to politicians' pockets. What for? Politicians don't create wealth. I mean, all they do is spend and spend and spend. I mean, instead of using this money to train engineers, doctors, accountants, economists, and stuff like that, the money goes into the pockets of politicians who don't create wealth and who don't create jobs.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is I am here in conversation with Cde Don Nkadimeng. He's conversing with us about the structure of our political governance and looking at, their efficacy and what we really need to do going forward as a country. One of the people observing on Facebook, guys, if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to ask Cde Don any questions on Facebook as well as on Zoom. I will take, Cde Don through these questions. And one of the issues that people are mentioning is the issue of corruption in our country. And you've mentioned, that a lot of billions are being charged, through corruption. Do you really think that the ANC as in government will be able to rid itself of corruption? And now that the spokesperson of the president, her family is kind of involved in some COVID-19 corruption activities or possible corruption activities. Is it really possible that this country can rid itself of corruption? And we have heard recently the Minister of Finance, for instance, talking about going to the market to source additional funds to support our country. Don't we think that that money, if it does come from MF and other funders, will just go into the corruption kitty instead of helping to resurrect the country out of the quagmire that we are finding ourselves?
Look, I don't think corruption in government can be wished away. I don't think it's going to happen anyway. I will tell you what I would do if I were Cyril Ramaphosa. Immediately, I got information that the husband of my spokesperson has been awarded a tender, 125 million out of COVID-19 funds. I would have immediately stepped in and fired my spokesperson. Because, at least compared to his predecessor, Ramaphosa had some form of human face, And we actually thought, well, a person who brings his own billions is not going to promote theft of taxpayers' money. But right under his nose, a tender is awarded to the husband of his spokesperson. It is just sickening. I mean, he would have just stepped in and said, look, people, I didn't know this was happening, but now that I know, these are corrective steps that I'm taking. I'm not going to allow that to happen because it tarnishes the image of my office. But I've been waiting for the president to say something. I don't know if he said it and I missed it, but I haven't heard him saying anything about it. But if it happens at the presidential palace, at the union buildings, I don't know if they will have the capacity, let alone the will to stop it.
Do you realize that President Ramaphosa has teeth to bite. I mean, considering the fact that he is where he is through some funding from dodgy people that we don't know. R1 billion was spent to get him to where he is, within his party.
Yes.
So we don't know how much more has been pumped into sustaining his position where he is as president of the country. But I mean, if an individual within a party spends R1 billion just to secure leadership of the party, that speaks volumes.
It does. It does. I mean, it is unbelievable. You can imagine what the country can do with R1 billion. I mean, look, I know Ramaphosa from those days in the 70s when he was a student at Ethiopia. And he was a nice young person. And I'm prepared at all times to give him the benefit of the doubt. At one stage, when I was Secretary General of AZAPO and he was Secretary General of the ANC, we actually met at the Twilly House and talked about negotiations. And we just met as Secretary General to explain why AZAPO was not part of the negotiations. I think he is operating from the belly of a monster. There is just no way he's going to be effective alone. There are so few people in the cabinet, for example, that are not having corruption clowns over them. You talk from Ramaphosa, maybe Sisulu, and a few others, right? You need only listen to the late Mlange decrying the rot in the ANC to understand that it has gone very, very far. Now, I don't think Ramaphosa has the power to end corruption within his own party. We have looked at various options that he might have. I don't think we can come up with anything that will be effective. The ANC has reached a point of no return in corruption. In other words, the only way in which the population can get rid of corruption will be to vote the ANC out of power. And this is my personal view. It's not even a political view. It's just my personal view, based on my own practical experience of the 50 years I've been involved in politics in this country.
Look, I mean, the people have to vote a different political power. Are there any signs that, these are the options that are available for people to vote for in the country? I mean, if you look at the voting patterns in the country over time, there's always been along, the traditional, political liberation movement and, the traditionally liberal parties of people. And there hasn't been anyone raising his hand strongly saying, look, I am the alternative. What do we really need to do as a people to provide with a very good alternative?
The thing that complicates political coalitions is political leaders thinking that politics should be a career. In a developing country, I think our politics should be developmental. We should be able to work together even where we don't agree 100%. Now, people may just be afraid that if the ANC loses power, there will be confusion in the country because no single opposition power or opposition party at present appears to be a viable alternative. And they're right. But I think it's just that I'm no longer an active politician, but my gut feeling would be opposition parties, especially black opposition parties, should come together and formulate a strategy in terms of which the general population is confident that if the ANC goes, there is an alternative government that will restore law and order and will be corrupt-free. No, I can't really say. You see, the biggest opposition party is the DA at present. But the DA is traditionally a white party. And white people historically have oppressed black people. A majority of black people will not vote for a white party in this country. Not now, not tomorrow. So the DA has reached a glass ceiling. It's no way it can rise beyond what support that they have at present, right? The future, therefore, is in coalition politics. And until such time that a viable alternative is formed by a coalition of opposition political parties, people are going to be very, very anxious. They would like to get rid of the ANC, but they will be very anxious about what would happen what would take its place.
Yeah. Because I think no one wants to go back to where we come from. But you see, the development is young people are now looking at parties like the DA as political parties and nothing more. They are not connected at all to the liberation struggle. And if you talk liberation struggle to them, it means nothing because they were not born. But juxtapose that against the developing phenomenon of what they call themselves as woke, young people who see themselves as conscientized and wanting to position themselves as change agents in the development of this country. What are your views on these developments?
Yeah, look, political ideas must also change at the pace of life. The problem maybe that some of us still have is to think of ourselves as conventional liberators. But I think the born frees, as I call them, have the right to their own lives. They must be able. With the change in technology today, our politics must also adjust to the changes, and I believe the youth must be heard, because times are gone when parents would dictate to the children what lives, what professions they must follow, what type of life they must live, and stuff like that. It is their own lives. They must have more and more say in the affairs of the country. I would support the move by young people to take their rightful place in the politics of the country. I would be a supporter of it.
Yeah. And earlier on, in part, you just made mention of the the judgment of the Constitutional Court around situation in elections. And I'm really, you're a seasoned legal in this country, and it would be interesting what your views are with regards to judgment, that basically says, well, we'll open up. And if AZAPO was to come to you and say, well, can you advise us on what perspective, can we get out of this judgment, and how do you move forward? What would be your advice?
Yeah, look, Look, I'm now thinking as a lawyer, not as a politician. If I were a constitutional court judge and I was about to make this historic announcement that people can represent others without going through a political party, I would have sought opinion, for example, from the IEC. I would have sought opinion from other political practitioners to say, I'm of the view that this constitution must provide for people to go into parliament through other means. Now, tell me how practical this is going to be. Judges cannot just follow the theory of law because it's correct to interpret the Constitution. The Constitution is a piece of legislation. It's just about less than 30 years old. It has gaps, many gaps. Now, if we leave it to individual, well, not really individual, but if we leave it to the Constitutional Court judges to fill up the gaps, we're going to land into serious problems because the judge does not say when an individual wants to represent a constituency in parliament other than through a political party. This should happen. They should have, the judge, the Constitutional Court should have gone beyond the interpretation of the law to say, we think as the court that our judgment is practical in the following respects.
Yeah.
Now, you can imagine what problems we have now with that constitutional, and it's a final judgment. The Constitutional Court cannot just go back and reverse it.
Yeah.
And the IEC, it's at 6s and 7s. They don't know what's going to happen because the Electoral Act has to change. And the whole structure of conducting elections in this country is going to change drastically. And they are very fearful. And the next elections are there in how many years? In 2 years, maybe.
In 2 years or so.
Yeah. So I would imagine that judges should be very, very careful when they introduce. There are certain laws of this country that are against the Constitution, granted. And it is the duty of the Constitutional Court to make sure that all the laws comply with the Constitution, granted. But where the judgments themselves create problems, the Constitutional Court should have the decency and the authority to say Parliament can pass this type of legislation that can be implemented in this particular way. But just to say, go and adopt a law that will practicalize my decision, I don't think it's fair. It's not fair at all to Parliament, to the IEC. Yeah.
And now it's there, and it's got to be implemented. And
it's got to be implemented.
And it's going to complicate matters when it comes to the provincial governance. And how do you influence this decision? Because at the end of the day, you have to consider the presence of constituencies, and if you look at local government, for instance, it's a hybrid arrangement where certain can contest as individuals for their own constituencies. I think how that will be practical and implementable with the provincial governments that we have, and I think it just makes sense. The argument for that maybe to uncomplicate the situation. These provincial governments.
The government could. Yes, the government could enact legislation that would make it possible by introducing a constituency-based election, but that won't work in favor of the ruling party constitution-based, it actually implies accountability. If an MP is linked to a constituency, the constituency has the right to recall, not the party. Now, it advantages the ruling party now that power rests with the party and not with the constituents. So I don't think they will go that way, but it will be a solution to the constitutional court problem.
So are we likely to see, a situation where the country is asked to vote for its president directly, as part of the package of changes that may have to be introduced, due to this judgment?
Well, I don't know if the present parliament, you see, the present parliament is still the terrain for the ruling party. I don't see it bringing about that type of legislation because it has its own complications. If, for example, the electorate were to elect a president from a party other than the ruling party, or somebody who doesn't belong to a political party, it can create a lot of instability in the country. Our country is not one of the most stable in the world. It can bring a lot of problems. I don't think Parliament will be ready to do that, to have the president elected directly by the people. It is too risky.
Look, Pradon, it's been 26 years, of ANC governance. What should we look forward to in the next 24 years when the country says, well, 50 years of democracy? How should that be looking like as we put this discussion?
Almost 30 years ago, when the negotiations started, and we withdrew from the negotiations, we predicted that there will be a second revolution within a lifetime. And the signs are all there. Look, I don't think there is any other country in the world that has as many protests as we have. There is no single day in this country where there's no protest of one shape or another. In other words, the population is very restless. Now, unless politicians, because they have the power now, change course drastically, I don't think we will see the next 26 years. I think there's going to be another revolution. And I don't want to say it because nobody wishes that to happen. But I think there's going to be another revolution because the first one was not properly concluded.
So the first one was aborted. And so in essence, we should prepare ourselves for a revolution against a liberation organization.
Yes, and it's a revolution that the politicians won't be able to handle because it will essentially be a revolution against them.
All right.
We are going to have very, very successful. I think the government must force those who occupy land at present and those who own the economy to bring those two issues on the table for a very, very serious discussion. Because, or create conditions in the country that will force those who own the economy and the land to bring them on to the agenda for discussion. Because it is only when the owners of the land are under pressure that they will they will agree to the fair distribution of the land. Otherwise, they won't do it. I mean,
Yes.
CODESA gave them a breathing space. They gave us political power and retained the two, the land and the economy. And then there was a period of lull in 26 years. There was no major struggle against those that own the means of production. But that is coming. That is coming. And my advice would be that those who own the economy and own the land must come together and realize that they can't own those things forever. Because our new generation is going to embark on a revolution and will take it back, right? It would be best if another CODESA, if I want to misuse the term, be held on land and on the economy as soon as possible.
Not so long ago, there was talk that there may be a need for another, as you put it, CODESA, to look at the land and the economy. And you seem to be agreeing with those people that it may be necessary that we get into another discussion. And I'm not too sure how likely are we to agree on the need, or to agree with those people or how likely those people are to agree with the oppressed that they need to transfer land, transfer the economy to the oppressed people. Because it's not in the nature of people who are holding power to transfer power willy-nilly.
No, it is not. They are not going to do it, but they will do it under pressure. I mean, if it wasn't for black people's pressure in the 70s and 80s, we wouldn't even have got this political power. Now, it depends on the citizens of this country. If they are satisfied to live under the present circumstances, fine. But they can't then complain.
Yeah.
Because there's just no way you can forever have less than 10% of the population occupying 87% of the land. You can't have that situation. It can't exist anywhere. It can't be sustained anywhere on this planet. Now, we know that at one point it's going to end. And how it is going to end and when it's going to end will depend on the citizens of this country. And if they make conditions so difficult for those who control those things, they might just agree to a discussion. And maybe for another compromise. But it can't be that a small population in our motherland would own 90% of the economy and 87% of the land forever and ever. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Now, unless the present government tries to address that, it will be too late, and they may not preside over the transfer of land and economy when the time comes.
Don, let's conclude this discussion. It's been over an hour of conversation, but I want us to do it. And as we do so, I'm really interested in your view of what will activate, those who are oppressed into struggle.
Come again, rephrase that.
No. What I'm saying is, there's a bit of complacency now, and every time into an election, people are hoping that things will change. What will really activate people to engage in that revolution that you are talking about? Because you are envisaging a second revolution coming, and largely due to the pressure that is needed for the transfer of power, economic power, the land. What would really be the tipping point that tips the scales to such a point where people, decide that this is enough? let's engage in that revolution as we conclude this discussion.
Okay, I think the present government, the social grants that they give to this to our unemployed and destitute people, these are going to dry up. You know, you can't give people grants without the hope of replacing the money with something. The government has now decided that everybody in the country must have some kind of income coming in. If you are not working, then you must be on old age pension, disability pension, child grant, or just 350 rand per month. Now,
not sustainable.
All that is going to dry up. I mean, it's unsustainable. There's just no way you can just spend and spend and spend and nothing comes into the kitty. Now, when they tell people at the time when the funds dry up, that you are no longer going to get your 350, you are no longer going to get this and that and that and that. That's the beginning of a revolution. Now, you have seen last month with the taxes. The taxes just said, you know, government, you can't just stop us from making income for our families. Arrest us. The government chickened down. You can't do that. You can't do that. Now, that is just a tiny portion of civil society that successfully defied the government. Now, can you imagine if the government is going to be defied by the unemployed, by the destitute, by the homeless, then you have a revolution of proportions that have never been experienced anywhere in the world. We are really sitting on a paradigm. But our politicians don't seem to realize that. They go about and making some more promises. How do you explain the president still forming committees to fight corruption now? By now, we would have expected at least half of the culprits in prison.
In prison, exactly.
But the president only last week says, yes, I CIU, call it that? SIU, I proclaim you have powers to do 1, 2, 3, and you can go and recover money stolen. Money stolen is never kept in the pockets of the thieves.
Exactly.
They will never find that money. So I really don't know. I just think the government is not doing enough. Why they are not doing enough to change course the lives of our people, I have no idea. I don't think they really care. Every politician thinks he's a career politician. That's,
So in essence, Don is saying the president was correct in saying we are on our own, and we need to take responsibility for our lives, for our land, for our economy, and for the development of our state. So we can't really trust that the state will do it for us. So let's do it ourselves. I wish to thank you, Don, for spending the time in conversation.
Yes.
It's been a very lovely discussion.
Yes. Well, it was a very entertaining maiden talk. I hope it's not the last.
No, it can't be the last. It can't be the last. I'm sure we will invite you again, for conversations. And in the coming weeks, there are a number of, areas that we want to explore with a number of our stalwarts. I look forward to the discussion that we'll be having in the next week or so on, the education crisis, for instance.
Education crisis.
Which is ongoing and continuing. And the other things that we want to talk about is, the experiences around the lockdown and the coronavirus. So it's going to be very interesting conversations coming up in the next couple of weeks. So I look forward to continue to engage with you. Let's connect again next Sunday, same time, same place. And thank you very much, and thank you for connecting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. You've been very generous yourself. Next time.
Thank you very much. Cheers, everybody. Have a good, lovely afternoon. Cheers. Yes, please make sure you continue to mask. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And